On Willow Creek Lane, people often said Daniel and Claire Mitchell were the kind of couple who belonged on the cover of a magazine. Their two-story colonial house, with its white shutters and perfect garden, seemed to mirror their lives. Neat, enviable, and unshakably solid. To the neighbors, they were the perfect couple. To themselves, it was a script rehearsed too many times to feel real. Claire smiled at the barbecues, laughed at Daniel's work jokes, and played the role of the doting wife. But behind those eyes lay a loneliness she no longer tried to hide from herself. Daniel kissed her cheek when others were watching. At night, in the privacy of their bedroom, his affection dissolved into silence. Theirs was a marriage built not on intimacy but on image, an image Daniel guarded fiercely. He was charming, successful, respected at his firm. Women leaned in when he spoke, and men envied the authority that carried in his voice. Claire had once loved that confidence. Now it felt like a wall built between them. Sometimes she would study him across the dinner table, the clink of cutlery filling the quiet. She would search his face for a flicker of warmth, a sign that the man she married was still there. Instead, she found shadows, expressions rehearsed, smiles too precise. "Daniel," she asked one evening, her voice soft, testing the waters, "do you ever feel like we're drifting?" He didn't look up from his plate. "You think too much, Claire. We're fine." The words were gentle but dismissive, like closing a door she had tried to pry open. She nodded, swallowing back the sting of rejection. He had mastered the art of ending conversations without raising his voice. To friends and colleagues, Claire would praise him. "Daniel's been working so hard," she would say, smiling as though pride outweighed the exhaustion in her heart. They saw devotion. She felt distance. What unsettled her most was the stillness in the house when Daniel wasn't home. She ought to have found peace in it, but instead it felt like an emptiness swallowing her whole. She would linger at the window, staring at the driveway, rehearsing how she might ask him for more time, more honesty, more love. But when his car finally pulled in, her resolve collapsed under his polished grin. At church gatherings and charity galas, Daniel held her hand, his thumb grazing her knuckles in a gesture that appeared intimate to onlookers. But Claire knew it, was calculated, a performance. Sometimes she wondered if he loved her at all, or if she was merely another possession, displayed like the watch on his wrist or the car he drove. Late at night, when he thought she was asleep, Claire would hear him pacing downstairs, his voice low, words murmured into the phone. She never caught the details, only the tone, sharp, commanding, nothing like the man he pretended to be. One night she dared to creep halfway down the stairs, clutching the banister as his voice drifted through the dark. No mistakes this time. "Do you understand me?" Her stomach tightened. She retreated before he could notice her, slipping silently beneath the covers. When he came to bed moments later, he smelled faintly of smoke and cologne. He kissed her temple, the same practiced kiss he always gave, and turned his back to her. Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words until dawn. The neighbors would still say they were perfect, but in that quiet house under the mask of devotion, something darker pulsed, a secret she could feel pressing against the walls of their marriage. And soon, those whispers in the dark would become impossible to ignore. The next night, the house was still but not quiet. Claire lay awake, her body tense under the covers, listening. She had trained herself to recognize the subtle rhythm of Daniel's breathing. Tonight it was uneven, restless. At 12:47 a.m., he slipped from the bed. Creak of the stairs carried through the silence like a warning. She waited, holding her breath before following, careful not to let the floor groan beneath her weight. From the hallway, she heard him, that same hushed voice. His words, though muffled, cut through the stillness. "You'll get what you need, but no one can know. Not yet." Claire's heart pounded against her ribs. She pressed herself closer to the wall, the cool paint biting into her cheek. "What about her?" A second voice crackled faintly from the phone. Daniel's reply was sharper this time, his tone clipped. "I'll handle her. Just do your part." A pause, then a low, humorless laugh. She trusts me too much. Claire felt the breath catch in her throat. She backed away, retreating up the stairs before her shaking knees betrayed her. When she slipped back into bed, her pulse raced so violently she feared it would echo in the room. Moments later, Daniel returned. He slid under the covers without a word, the mattress dipping under his weight. He smelled faintly of earth and smoke, the same mix she noticed before. His breathing slowed, feigned sleep. Claire turned her face to the wall, her eyes wide open in the dark. In the morning, Daniel poured coffee as if nothing had happened. His shirt was pressed, his tie neatly knotted. Claire forced her hands to stay steady as she took her cup. Late. Night? She asked carefully, her voice light. He didn't look at her. Work call, you know how it is. She smiled weakly, though inside the lie cut deep. Work calls don't happen at midnight, she thought. That day the house felt different. The quiet no longer comforted her. It pressed against her, suffocating. Every corner seemed to hum with secrets she could not name. She tried distracting herself, with chores, folding laundry, watering plants, but her mind replayed his words. I'll handle her. She trusts me too much. Who was he talking about? By evening, her unease had sharpened into suspicion. She searched his study when he stepped out. For a meeting. The drawers were too neat, the papers stacked with obsessive care. Nothing obvious, yet the emptiness itself felt wrong, like a stage cleared of props. When Daniel came home, he greeted her with flowers, a sudden burst of charm. He kissed her cheek, his lips lingering longer than usual. You've been quiet. He observed. Just tired, she lied. His eyes lingered on her face a moment too long, as if weighing whether to believe her. Then he smiled. That perfect, hollow smile. That night, Claire dreamed of whispers she couldn't silence. When she woke, the air smelled faintly of damp earth, drifting in through the open window from the garden below. She pushed aside the curtain and peered out. Moonlight glistened off the tools in the shed. A shovel leaned against the door, its blade streaked dark. Her breath caught. Something in that garden waited for her, and she knew sooner or later she would have to look. The morning after the sleepless night, Claire's eyes drifted toward the garden as she washed the breakfast dishes. The shed stood there, silent, ordinary, yet ominous. The image of the streaked shovel from the night before gnawed at her until she could no longer ignore it. By mid-morning, Daniel had left for work, and the quiet pressed in. She carried the keys from the drawer, her hands trembling as she stepped across the damp grass. Each step felt heavier, as though the earth itself resisted her. The lock clicked and the door creaked open. Inside, the smell was sharp, metallic and earthy, a tang that made her throat tighten. Tools hung neatly on the wall, each in its place. But in the corner, half buried beneath a pile of rags and soil-stained gloves, she found it. A shirt, white once, now smeared with a dark maroon that had stiffened into the fabric. She froze, her breath stuttering as her fingers traced the stains. It was unmistakable. Blood. The world tilted around her. She stumbled back, clutching the shirt like it might vanish if she let go. Behind her, the sound of the garden hose hissed to life. She spun, and there was Daniel, watering the roses, his sleeves rolled up, his movements casual, almost graceful. He looked up, meeting her eyes with that same polished calm. What are you doing in there? His tone was mild, as though he had caught her rearranging the pantry. Claire's voice cracked. What is this? She held the shirt aloft. The morning, sun illuminating its terrible stains. Daniel's brows furrowed, but his expression remained controlled. That, for God's sake, Claire. I cut myself working on the car last week. It's grease and a little blood. Nothing more. Her grip tightened. This isn't a scratch, Daniel. There's too much. Why hide it in the shed? He sighed, setting down the hose. Droplets sparkled on the roses, dripping like beads of glass. He walked toward her slowly, his presence filling the space between them. You're overthinking again, he said softly, almost soothingly. Always looking for problems where there are none. You need to stop working yourself up like this. I'm not imagining this, she whispered. Claire. His voice hardened. You've been stressed, lonely. You know how your mind gets when you're tired. He reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I'm here. I would never hurt you. Never." For a moment, she almost believed him. His eyes were steady, his touch warm. The voice she once trusted wrapped around her like a net, but then she looked back at the shirt in her hands, stiff with dried blood, and her chest, constricted. Daniel gently took it from her and tossed it back onto the pile, burying it under the rags again as though covering a child's toy. "Forget about it," he said, turning away. "I'll clean it up later." Claire stood frozen, her mind screaming while her body betrayed her with stillness. The garden smelled sweet from the roses, yet all she could taste was iron. That night, the silence at dinner was unbearable. Daniel ate calmly, sipping his wine, while Claire pushed food around her plate. Finally, she spoke. "Daniel, if there's something you're not telling me..." The following afternoon, Claire drove to Elise's townhouse, her hands tight around the steering wheel. Each stoplight felt like a test of will. She hadn't told anyone about the shirt, about the whispers, about the fear that stalked her through her own home. Yet Daniel's smooth dismissal echoed in her mind until she felt she might unravel. Elise opened the door with her usual warmth, ushering Claire inside. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, grounding her in a way the silence of her house never could. "You look pale," Elise said, frowning as she set 2 mugs on the table. "What's wrong?" Claire sat, her hands trembling around the cup. For a moment she considered staying silent, but Elise's steady gaze broke her resolve. "It's Daniel," she whispered. I think something's wrong. Something I can't explain." Through halting breaths, she told Elise everything. The midnight phone call, the bloodied shirt in the shed, the way Daniel's charm flipped into something harder when pressed. As she spoke, she felt both relief and shame, as though confessing a betrayal of her marriage vows. When she finished, Elise leaned back, her expression troubled. "I've always had a feeling about him," Elise murmured. "Even before you married, there was something too polished, too careful, like he practiced every smile before giving it to the world." Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" Elise hesitated, then leaned closer. "Years ago, before you met, I heard rumors, a girlfriend who disappeared, a fight in another city he never talked about. I thought it was just gossip, but now..." She let the words trail off. Claire's heart sank. "You never told me this." "You seemed so happy," Elise said softly. "I didn't want to ruin it. But Claire, maybe it's time you start digging. Find out who your husband really is." Claire's chest tightened. Loyalty battled fear within her, each thought pulling her in opposite directions. Daniel had been her anchor, her partner, the man who vowed to protect her. Yet every memory she clung to now seemed fragile, coated in shadows. "What if I'm wrong?" she asked, her voice cracking. "What if I'm just imagining all this like he says?" Elise shook her head firmly. "Men like Daniel know how to twist the truth. That's not paranoia, it's survival instinct. Trust it." The words hit hard. Claire looked down at her coffee, its surface rippling from the trembling of her hands. The image of the blood-stained shirt burned in her mind. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted. Elise leaned forward, her tone urgent now. "Start with his past. Old records, photos, anything. People don't just erase themselves completely. If he's hiding something, you'll find it." When Claire left Elise's house, the sun was sinking, throwing long shadows across the street. Her thoughts churned as she drove home, the weight of suspicion pressing heavier with every mile. The house stood quiet when she arrived. Daniel's car wasn't in the driveway. She unlocked the door, her heart pounding. For the first time, she stepped into his study with intention. The air smelled faintly of cedar polish and paper. Her eyes scanned the shelves, the desk, the locked drawer at the bottom. Then she noticed a corner of an old photograph jutting out from under a book. She pulled it free, her pulse quickening. It was Daniel, younger, standing beside a woman she didn't recognize. Both were smiling, but the woman's eyes seemed wary, distant. Claire's breath caught. Who was she, and why had Daniel hidden the photo? The photograph wouldn't leave Claire's hand. Even as she paced Daniel's study, her eyes kept returning. to the image of the young woman standing close to him. She had the kind of smile that was polite but guarded, as though forced for the sake of the camera. The unease in her eyes whispered louder the longer Claire stared. She slipped the photo into her purse before Daniel returned, her heart hammering with the weight of secrecy. That night, while Daniel slept beside her with his steady, almost calculated breathing, Claire lay awake, staring into the darkness. Every shift of his body felt like a threat. By morning, she knew what she had to do. At the library downtown, she claimed a corner computer, the screen glowing against the dim quiet. She typed Daniel's old workplaces into the search bar, tracing his career from the years before they met. The results came slowly: press releases, company mergers, forgettable news articles. But then, a headline caught her breath. Local woman still missing. Investigation ongoing after employee disappearance. Her pulse quickened. She clicked. The article was dated 8 years ago. The missing woman was described as an accounts manager for a firm where Daniel had once worked. Her name, Rachel Monroe. Claire's eyes slid to the grainy black and white photo attached to the article. It was her, the woman from the picture. The air in Claire's lungs turned to stone. She scrolled down, devouring every word. Rachel had vanished after leaving work late one evening. Her car was found abandoned near a wooded area, her belongings still inside. No forced entry, no clear leads. And then one detail made Claire's blood run cold. Rachel had been last seen speaking to a coworker, described by witnesses as a tall man with dark hair. Claire's hands shook on the mouse. Dark hair, tall, just like Daniel. Her phone buzzed, startling her. Elise. She hesitated, then answered in a hushed tone. Elise, I found something, she said, voice quivering. Her name was Rachel Monroe. She worked with Daniel. She went missing. There was silence, then Elise's urgent whisper. Claire, you need to leave that house. I can't. Not yet. I need proof. If I accuse him without it. Claire. Elise cut in sharply. This isn't about proof. It's about survival. Men like him don't just change. If he's hiding this, you could be next. Claire's eyes flicked nervously around the library, as though Daniel might appear between the stacks. Just don't say anything to anyone, not yet. I'll figure this out. She ended the call before Elise could protest. Hours later, back at the house, Claire slipped into Daniel's study again. Every shadow in the room seemed to close in, but her determination overpowered the fear. She rifled through drawers, boxes, folders, anything that might connect him to Rachel. At the bottom of a file cabinet, she found a folded sheet of paper. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. It was an old company roster. And there was Rachel's name, circled in red pen. Her stomach dropped. She stuffed the roster into her purse and closed the drawer carefully, praying Daniel wouldn't notice. The front door creaked open. Claire froze, heart pounding as Daniel's footsteps echoed in the hallway. Quickly, she slid back into the living room, feigning calm as he entered. He smiled at her, that flawless smile that always seemed rehearsed. What have you been up to today? Claire forced a breath. Just errands. Daniel's gaze lingered on her. Too long, too sharp, before he finally looked away. But Claire knew deep down he could sense the shift, and now she couldn't unsee Rachel's haunted smile staring back at her from the photo. That night, Claire lay awake, her body stiff beside Daniel's. His even breath should have been soothing, but to her they felt mechanical, practiced, like everything else about him. She stared at the ceiling, the image of Rachel Monroe etched behind her eyelids. By morning, she made a decision. If she couldn't confront him directly, she would watch him. Claire started a small notebook hidden deep in her purse. Each page, marked with neat times and dates, scribbled observations and fragments of memory. Daniel left at 7:30 a.m. for work. Yet one evening he returned home later than usual, shirt collar undone, smelling faintly of earth. Traffic, he muttered when she asked. The notebook, however, told another story. He had left early that morning but returned far later than traffic could explain. On another day, Daniel claimed he had a late meeting, but she checked the company's online calendar from her phone. No such meeting was listed. Every inconsistency tightened the knot in her chest. She began following him at a distance once, parking across from the cafe he claimed was his meeting spot. Hours passed, but Daniel never appeared. The tension finally snapped one evening. Daniel arrived home later than usual, his hands damp, his eyes sharp as though already on edge. Claire stood in the kitchen, her notebook trembling in her grip. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. He dropped his keys onto the counter with a sharp clink. "I told you, work." Her fingers tightened around the notebook. "Don't lie to me, I've been keeping track. Your stories don't match. Meetings that don't exist, nights you can't account for. What are you hiding, Daniel?" For a heartbeat, silence filled the room, thick and dangerous. Then his face hardened. "You're spying on me." His voice cracked like a whip. "What kind of wife does that?" "I had to," Claire said, tears burning her eyes. "I'm scared, Daniel. I found—" She stopped herself, swallowing Rachel's name, but Daniel seized on the hesitation. His eyes narrowed, and then his lips curled into something cruel. "You think I'm hiding something? That I'm the liar?" His voice rose, slamming against the walls of the kitchen. "You're the one sneaking around, aren't you? Scribbling in your little book because you can't face your own guilt." Her breath hitched. "What are you talking about?" He stepped closer, the air between them electric with menace. "Don't play innocent, Claire. I see the way you look at people, the way you disappear for hours. Who is it? Who have you been with?" Claire's chest tightened, the room spinning around her. His accusation flipped the floor beneath her feet. He was shifting everything, dragging suspicion away from himself and throwing it onto her. "I would never," she began, but he cut her off. Claire barely slept after the confrontation. Daniel's accusations clung to her skin like a stain, his words echoing in the hollow silence of the house. She thought she might lose her mind, until the following afternoon a knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find a man in plain clothes, early 40s, with sharp eyes that didn't match the casual smile he offered. "Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked, voice low. She hesitated. "Yes." He showed her a badge discreetly. "Detective Harris." Claire's blood chilled. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Harris leaned forward, his tone cautious but firm. "I won't take much of your time," he said. "This is off the record. Someone close to you reached out with concerns, said you might be in danger." Her heart lurched. "Elise." Claire's fingers tightened around her glass of water. I don't understand." Harris studied her carefully. "Your husband, Daniel Whitmore, is a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. I can't give you every detail, but I can tell you this. He's already on our radar." The word struck her like a physical blow. It was confirmation of everything she feared, yet hearing them aloud felt unbearable. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because if you know something, if you've seen something, you need to be careful. We're watching him, but that doesn't mean you're safe." The kitchen felt smaller with each passing second. Daniel could walk in at any moment. The thought made her stomach twist. "I can't." Her voice broke. "If he finds out I've spoken to you, he'll—" Harris interrupted softly. "That's why this has to stay between us. I'm not asking you to testify, not yet. But if he slips, if you see anything we can use, you call me, immediately." He slid a card across the table. Claire stared at it, the black numbers blurring. Through her tears, to call meant exposing herself. To stay silent meant suffocating in Daniel's shadow. Her voice came out in a whisper. "Do you think he's dangerous?" Harris didn't answer right away. His silence was louder than words. Finally, he said, "I think he's a man who knows how to hide. That makes him very dangerous." The front door creaked. Claire's entire body jolted. Harris moved quickly, sliding back his chair and standing. "I was never here," he said quietly, already moving toward the back door. By the time Daniel stepped into the kitchen, Harris had disappeared. Daniel's eyes narrowed at Claire, scanning, her face with unnerving precision. "Who were you talking to?" Her throat closed, she forced a shaky smile. Just the television. Daniel's gaze lingered, heavy and probing. Then, with a small nod, he walked past her, humming under his breath as if nothing were amiss. But Claire knew. He didn't believe her. And now, with the detective's card burning a hole in her pocket, she was caught between two predators, the man she married, and the truth waiting to consume them both. The morning after Detective Harris's visit, Claire found roses on the kitchen counter. A dozen red blooms stood tall in a crystal vase, dew still clinging to their petals. Beside them, a note in Daniel's familiar handwriting read, "To my beautiful wife, forgive my temper. You are everything to me." Her hands trembled as she traced the words. Forgiveness dressed in roses, but all she could hear was his voice from 2 nights before, accusing her of betrayal. For days, Daniel slipped seamlessly into the role of doting husband. He kissed her forehead before leaving for work, sent midday texts, "Thinking of you, miss you already," and left chocolates on her pillow. To anyone looking in, their marriage seemed restored. But beneath the gestures, the ground shook. His eyes followed her too closely, his questions cut too sharply. "Where did you go this afternoon?" he asked one evening, setting his fork down mid-dinner. "To the store," she answered, keeping her tone even. His smile was warm, almost gentle. "Good. I like knowing where you are." She forced a nod, but her chest ached with unease. Every kindness was laced with surveillance. The cruelty always returned. One night, as Claire folded laundry in the living room, Daniel suddenly appeared behind her, slamming his fist against the wall. She jumped, nearly dropping the shirt in her hands. "Who was here?" he demanded. "No one," she stammered. "Don't lie to me." His face hovered inches from hers, breath hot, eyes glinting with suspicion. Then, just as quickly, he softened, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I don't want to fight," he whispered. "I just love you too much." Her body shook with confusion. Love and terror in the same breath. The contrast hollowed her out. At night, she would lie awake, her mind unraveling in loops of doubt. Was she overreacting? Had she imagined the darkness in his voice? Perhaps he truly did love her, and she was cruel for not believing it. The detective's warning, Elise's suspicions, the blood-stained shirt. Sometimes they blurred together, as though her memory itself was fractured. Yet in the morning, when she found another love note on her pillow, "I can't live without you," her stomach twisted. The words felt less like devotion, more like a threat. One evening, Daniel brought her to the garden. The roses he had watered so carefully now bloomed in thick, dark clusters. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm, guiding her gaze. "See how beautiful they are," he murmured. "Like us. No matter what happens, we survive." Tone was calm, but his hand pressed harder into her shoulder until it hurt. Claire bit back a cry, nodding weakly, praying he would release her. He smiled then, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good girl." When he finally went inside, Claire remained in the garden, staring at the flowers that now felt like gravestones. The walls of her mind pressed tighter with each day, his alternating tenderness and cruelty shredding her sense of reality. Her breath came ragged as she whispered into the night air, "I'm losing myself." But even as the words left her lips, something inside hardened. Daniel wanted her confused, broken, dependent, but she still had the detective's card hidden in her purse, and Elise's voice in her memory urging her to see the truth. For the first time, Claire realized she wasn't just fighting for clarity. She was fighting for her life, and the shadows around her house were beginning to move. Rain lashed against the windows, rattling the panes like desperate fists. Claire startled awake, the storm's howl mixing with an emptiness beside her in the bed. Daniel was gone, her chest tightened. She sat up, straining to hear beyond the thunder. A faint sound reached her through the storm. The creak of the back door closing. Heart pounding, she slipped from the sheets, her bare feet cold against the hardwood. She wrapped her robe tightly around herself and moved toward the hallway. Every instinct screamed to stay put, but silence and waiting had already nearly destroyed her. The kitchen smelled faintly of rain, the back door ajar. She touched the knob, wet and cold, and stepped outside. The storm swallowed her. Wind tore at her hair, rain soaking the robe clinging to her skin. She blinked against the downpour, her eyes catching something in the mud. Tracks. Large, heavy footprints pressed into the soil, leading toward the shed at the far edge of the garden. Her breath caught. That shed had already revealed one horror. Still, she followed. Each step sank into the earth, her heartbeat a drum in her ears. Thunder boomed, and in its flash of light she saw movement near the shed. Daniel's figure bent low, dragging something. Something wrapped in a tarp. She froze, her entire body trembling. The shape inside was unmistakable. Human. A heavy, limp outline dragged mercilessly across the mud. "No," she whispered, though the storm swallowed her voice. Daniel grunted, adjusting his grip on the tarp, unaware she was watching. His face, briefly lit by lightning, was twisted in grim determination. Claire's breath broke into sobs. A scream ripped from her throat before she could stop it, piercing the storm. "Daniel!" He jerked upright, the tarp dropping heavily into the mud. For one suspended second, husband and wife stared across the storm. The truth finally laid bare between them. Claire stumbled backward. "What is that? Oh my God, Daniel! What have you done?" He moved slowly, deliberately, stepping closer, his soaked clothes clinging to his frame. "It's nothing," he said, voice low and calm, though his eyes burned. "You shouldn't be out here. Don't lie to me," she screamed, the storm whipping her voice into the night. "There's someone in there." Daniel tilted his head, rain streaming down his face like tears. "You don't understand. I was protecting us. Everything I've done, it's for you." Her body shook violently. "For me. You're insane." He took another step forward. "No, Claire. I've given you a perfect life. Everything you have is because of me. Don't ruin this now." She glanced at the tarp, then back at him, terror tightening her chest. "You killed them, didn't you? The woman, all the secrets, it's all true." His jaw tightened and something inside him broke. "You were supposed to trust me." Suddenly he lunged. Claire screamed again, stumbling back into the mud, her hands scrambling for anything to defend herself. Her fingers found a broken branch, slick with rain, and she raised it like a weapon. "Stay away," she cried, voice cracking. Daniel's face contorted in fury and desperation. Lightning lit the sky as he closed the distance between them, his shadow towering over her. The storm swallowed every sound, the crash of thunder, the thud of footsteps, her own ragged breathing, until only one truth remained. There was no escaping him now. The tarp lay abandoned in the mud, its contents shifting slightly with the movement of water. Claire's eyes darted to it in horror, but she had no time to think. Daniel's hands reached for her, and the night erupted in chaos. The storm had not yet lifted when the sirens came. Claire's scream, Daniel's lunge, and the thrashing chaos in the garden bled into flashing blue and red lights. Neighbors had heard her cries. Within minutes, the backyard was swarming with officers, their flashlights cutting through sheets of rain. Daniel fought, of course. He always fought when cornered. But there was no controlling the weight of law, no charm or manipulation that could bend steel handcuffs. They dragged him from the mud, his face twisted in rage, shouting her name as if she had betrayed him. Claire stood trembling under an officer's umbrella. Mud streaked up her legs, watching the man she had once called her husband hauled away like a feral animal. Weeks later, the courtroom replaced the storm. It was no quieter. Murmurs rose and fell like waves as the trial began, the name Daniel Whitmore whispered like a curse. Claire sat stiffly on the wooden bench, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Her lawyer leaned close. "You don't have to testify today," he murmured, but she shook her head. "I need to see this." Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded. Daniel sat across the room at the defendant's table, clean-shaven, suited, his expression neutral, almost serene. Yet Claire knew the storm inside him. She could feel his eyes slide toward her, soft and almost tender, as though none of it had happened. The prosecution wasted no time. Photographs splashed onto the screen. The tarp in the mud, the bloodied shirt, records of Daniel's late-night movements. Then came the testimonies. First, a grieving mother. Her daughter had vanished 3 years ago. Last seen leaving work at the very company Daniel had managed. The mother's voice cracked as she described the endless nights of searching, the posters, the unanswered calls. Next, a former colleague. She admitted she had once been close to Daniel, charmed by him, but had escaped after sensing a darker edge. Her hands shook as she recounted threats whispered in hallways, her career nearly destroyed when she tried to report him. One by one, the women came. Survivors. Families of those who had not survived. Each story wove into the next until the portrait of Daniel grew darker, layered with lies, manipulation, and violence hidden beneath the facade of the perfect suburban husband. Claire's chest felt tight, tears brimming as she listened. For years she had thought she was alone in her fear, her doubt. But she wasn't. The truth was bigger, more monstrous than she had imagined. When her turn finally came, the room seemed to still. Claire rose slowly, her legs weak but unyielding. She placed her hand on the rail, steadying herself as she looked at the jury. "I loved him," she began, her voice breaking. "I believed him when he said I was safe. But every smile was a lie, every promise a trap. I thought the blood in the shed was my imagination. I thought the phone calls, the late nights, they were just my insecurities. But it was all real. He made me doubt my own mind, and that was his greatest weapon. Until the night I saw him drag that tarp, I still wanted to believe he was good. That's the kind of power he had over me." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. "I'm not the only one, and we can't let there be another." Daniel finally spoke, rising with cold composure. His voice cut through the courtroom like ice. "She's lying. They all are. This is a witch hunt, punishment for being a strong man who women couldn't handle. Claire was jealous, paranoid. She imagined everything." His gaze locked on her. "You'll regret this." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge struck his gavel, demanding silence, but the damage was done. His threat still hung heavy in the air. Claire lowered herself back onto the bench, trembling but resolute. She had exposed him. The web of lies was unraveling, thread by thread, in front of the world. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, their questions like shards of glass. But inside, Claire found a small measure of peace. Whatever came next, verdict, sentence, freedom, or danger, the truth was no longer hidden in shadows. The trial was not only Daniel's, it was hers too, and it was far from over. The day of sentencing arrived with an eerie calm. Reporters clustered outside the courthouse, microphones flashing, but Claire walked past them as though drifting through fog. Inside, she sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the judge's lips as the words fell like stones. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The gavel struck sharp and final. The courtroom erupted with murmurs, some sighs of relief, others muted sobs from families of the women Daniel had hurt. Claire exhaled shakily, but there was no relief, only a hollow ache. Daniel did not flinch. He turned once, his eyes grazing hers across the room, calm, almost amused. For years, those eyes had been her comfort. Now they were her curse. That night, Claire sat alone at her kitchen table. The house was too quiet. The roses Daniel once watered outside her window were withering, their petals dry and curling. She placed her hand over the wood grain of the table and remembered dinners, his laughter, the clink of glasses, the way he'd brush her hand with his thumb, as though love was eternal. It had all been a mask. The memories played like broken film reels. His lips against hers after a long day, his arm pulling her close in bed. She pressed her hands against her face, shuddering. How many nights did I fall asleep beside a murderer? Her phone buzzed. A message from Elise. "He's gone, Claire. You can breathe now." But Claire couldn't. Breathing felt like drowning in a sea of ghosts. Weeks passed, yet the nightmares clung to her. Some nights she woke gasping, convinced she could hear his footsteps in the hallway. Other nights she dreamed of the bloodied shirt, of muddy tracks leading back to her bed. Even silence became a torment, pressing against her ribs. She sought therapy, though at first the words stuck in her throat. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered during her first session. "I thought I was a wife. I thought I was loved. Now I feel like nothing more than evidence." The therapist nodded gently. "You survived what others didn't. That doesn't make you less. It makes you more." But Claire wasn't sure she believed it. One evening she walked through the garden alone. The shed stood at the far end, padlocked now, but its presence loomed like a shadow. She placed a hand on the wood, her breath trembling. It was here that she had first seen the truth, where her world had shattered. "Justice is done," she whispered aloud as if convincing herself. "But the scars are mine to keep." The wind stirred through the roses, carrying the scent of earth and decay. For the first time in months, Claire let herself cry. Not for Daniel, not for the lost years, but for the woman she used to be. When her tears dried, she stood taller. The scars would remain, yes, but so would her will to live beyond them. She turned her back on the shed, walking toward the faint glow of her house. Tomorrow would come, and she would meet it. I used to believe that marriage was a sanctuary, that vows spoken beneath soft lights and tender music meant safety, permanence, devotion. But when I look back now, I realize that the man I loved most was also the one who came closest to destroying me. Daniel was my husband, my partner, my murderer in disguise. Even with him locked away, the house hasn't let me forget. Every corner hums with ghosts. I'll pour a glass of wine at the kitchen counter and hear his laugh, low and charming, the same laugh that once masked a lie. I'll fold laundry on our bed and feel the weight of his presence beside me, as though he might whisper in my ear again. Sometimes I wake at night certain he's watching me. I know he isn't, but his shadow lingers like a second skin. People ask me why I stayed for so long, why I didn't run the moment the doubts began. The truth is complicated. Love doesn't vanish the instant suspicion creeps in. It mutates, twisting between hope and fear. For every moment I wondered if Daniel was hiding something, there was another moment where he kissed me so gently, I convinced myself I was imagining it all. That's how betrayal works. It feeds on the heart's desire to believe. Even now, I sometimes catch myself remembering only the tender pieces. The picnics by the lake, the way he used to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, the warmth of his hand at the small of my back. And then I remind myself, those same hands buried the truth in our garden shed. Love and horror lived under the same roof, and I was too blinded to see. The trial ended. The sentence was passed. But my story isn't over. Justice doesn't stitch the wounds. It only stops the bleeding. I live with scars that don't fade, scars that whisper at night when the house is still. Sometimes I hear his voice, not in the world outside, but in my head. Smooth, persuasive, always on the edge of a promise. "It's all in your imagination, Claire. You're safe with me." Even knowing he's caged behind bars, part of me believes him. That is the cruelest truth of all. If there's anything I've learned, it's that evil doesn't always arrive wearing a mask of menace. Sometimes it comes smiling, holding flowers, whispering, "I love you." It slips into your life disguised as the very thing you trust most. My marriage began with vows. It ended with screams. But the echoes still follow me, reminding me that true crime never ends. Not in the courts, not in the newspapers, and certainly not in the heart of the one left behind. I was married to Daniel. I was married to love. I was married to murder, and I will carry all three to my grave.